Hello everyone, AJ here. Today we're going to talk about dirty energy and clean energy and ways that can affect you and your experience using it. During some of the slides, they'll have links at the bottom. You might not be able to see these, so I'm going to post an attachment so you can check these to reference them for yourself. I suggest you do this. Now I know we're going to get started and we're going to look at a couple questions you might have. What are fossil fuels and when do we start using them? Who benefits using dirty energy? Do we pay more than just with our money to use them? Is there a safer way to make energy? Do we use all the sources of free clean energy? What are some of the health risks not using clean energy for us and our environment? Start first by looking at some dirty energy. Start with coal power. Sometime during the 1300s, we used it for cooking and heating in homes. During the 1700s, the English found it to be a source of power. So during the 1800s, we used it to fuel our trains that operated by steam. We didn't actually start using it for electricity until 1880. It's all fine and good, but what are the health risks from using coal for us in our environment? We're going to do this by looking at an article by the U.S. National Library of Medicine. It should help clear this up for us. Coal is the largest energy source of generating electricity in U.S. power plants. There are approximately 1,200 coal-fired generators at 450 facilities in the United States, which would mean there's at least 3 at each facility. They generate about 44.6% of our country's electricity. It also states that it's the biggest source of pollutants that emits 84, mind you, these emit 84 out of 187 pollutants, hazardous pollutants identified by the EPA, and that's just in the air. It also states that these hazardous air pollutants emitted by coal-fired power plants can cause a wide range of health effects, including heart and lung disease such as asthma. Exposure to these pollutants can damage the brain, the eyes, the skin, the breathing passage. It can affect your kidneys, your lungs, your nerves, your respiratory system. Exposure can affect your learning, your memory, and your behavior. For those who fish, you might find this appalling. Mercury pollutes lakes, streams, and rivers and accumulates in fish. Nearly all fish and shellfish contain mercury. I'm going to stop right there and say that this is definitely a dirty energy, and it also adds to acid rain, by the way. So now we're going to talk about some oil power. We started using this in 1859. But we only used a fraction of the crude oil in producing kerosene for lighting. We further adapted the use of this in our combustion engines in the 1900s, and since then we've increasingly depended upon it for travel. There's been 10 major spills that we know of, or at least they considered major. They're all major in my opinion, but we'll just focus on 2 of the 10 that they published. First being documented in France in 1978, spilling 68.7 million gallons of crude oil in the ocean. This contaminated 200 miles of the French shoreline. I mean, that's pretty bad. That's a lot of acres and mileage. I mean, you can only imagine what it did. All right. Now, the worst spill has been reported in Kuwait during the Gulf War in 1991. 240 to 336 millions of gallons flowed into the Persian Gulf, and only an eighth of it actually was recovered by scheming and other techniques, I'm sure. And a quarter of it actually washed back on shore in Saudi Arabia. So I can only imagine the wildlife and animals that were affected by this. It also produces carbon dioxide and unused methane gas while burning this substance. We also use this in cosmetics. So I'm going to read what the organic makeup company posts. Past research links propylene glycol to a serious health problems as liver and kidney damage, as well as respiratory irritation or nausea if swallowed. Now, BP had a little incident with one of their rigs, which added some oil to our ocean as well. Okay, they did a study on it, so I'm going to quote you some of what their findings were. The study is trying to identify the exposure of workers to a variety of chemicals linked to health problems contained in the oil and natural gas released during the accident, including benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, Leedskalin, and the chemicals contained in the disbursement during the spill. Now, if the disbursement had another genetic makeup that was altogether all poisonous by itself, arsenic being one of the one of the chemicals used in it. It also states that in the initial period of exposure, the participants reported wheezing, tightness in the chest, shortness of breath, watering, burning of the or itching of the eyes, stuffy, itchy, or runny nose, burning of the nose, the throat or lungs, skin rashes, sores, blisters lasting up to 3 days, severe headaches, migraines, nausea, excessive fatigue, tiredness, diarrhea, sore throat, and being unable to concentrate. Some fishermen and coastal residents have reported fish that were deformed or evidence of hydrocarbons in shrimp and oysters. Okay, so oil is definitely also not safe for us. Now that leads us to natural gas. It says natural, so it's got to be good, right? If it says natural, it's a gas. Well, it's also a dirty energy. They started using it back in 100 BC. We're going to go a little bit forward where we actually started tapping into the ground to start harnessing it. So the first well was actually dug by a man in New York in 1821 by the name of William Hart. Then later in 1885, Robert Bunsen invented the Bunsen burner, so now we have another use for it, essentially. But it wasn't really utilized until 1920. Now it's pretty much used in almost everything. But similar to coal, it also emits pollutants like benzene, a known carcinogen that can lead to health problems such as asthma, cancer, and long-term lung damage in people who live nearby these plants. It also is a powerful greenhouse gas when it leaks from wells or pipes and consists mostly of methane. So I'm going to go with natural gas. Even though it's more natural, it's still not as good. All right, that leads us to nuclear power. Now, the main component of nuclear power is uranium, which was discovered in 1789 by Martin Koproff, a German chemist, and he named it after the planet Uranus. I'm sure there's a pun there. But anyways, we'll move on. So after several years of tests, bombs, experiments, we found it could produce huge amounts of power as well as deadly destruction. So we decided to incorporate it into our power grid sometime in the early 60s. But they say that it produces less pollutants than coal. Now in 1986, in April, it was decided to use the Chernobyl power plant for electrical engineering experiment. On its turbine generators, the machine used to convert energy of steam into electricity. The purpose was to develop a system utilizing a rotational error of the turbine generator to operate water pumps if electric power should be lost. Which is a good idea in theory, but the plant actually blew up, so it did not work well for them. Now, it also says, for the first 2 days after the accident, the wind carried the radioactive dust over Finland, Sweden, and on the third and fourth day, the wind shifted, carrying it to Poland, Czechoslovakia, Australia, and northern Italy. It then shifted further southward to deposit the material over Romania and Bulgaria. So people all over the world were exposed to external radiation and radioactive gases from dust suspended in the air that settled on the ground. They were also exposed internally by inhaling it and from these materials or even eating food that contaminated it with them. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 2011. In Japan, Fukushima nuclear reactor plant exploding. You might not know this, but it was also built on an earthquake fault line. California has 2 reactors that are also built on fault lines. But anyways, I'm going to quote NBC. They say that Fukushima radioactive water release has taken its time journeying across the Pacific. By comparison, atmospheric radiation from Fukushima plant began reaching the United States West Coast within just a few days of the disaster. Okay, so what that basically says is that it's going to take longer for what's in the water to get to us. It only took a couple of days for it to hit us by airboat. So, they also state that while the plant was emitting radiation, only half of the EPA radiation monitors worked. 3 were out of service, and the others had to be checked for faulty data. And that was just really on the West Coast that they're reporting this. Alex Jones also is a, people would call a conspiracy person, but he touched base on this too. He asked one of his guests one question, and the guy was a physicist. Is there any safe form of atomic or nuclear power? Which is actually a really good question. The physicist, Dr. Chris Busby, answers, no, there isn't. It's not possible to constrain the atom, as they all have harmful effects, even at very low concentrations. Global Research, I'm going to quote an article from them, says, the crisis of Japan has better described as a nuclear war without a war. In the words of renowned novelist Haruki Murakami says, this time no one dropped a bomb on us. We set the stage. We committed the crime with our own hands. We are destroying our lands, and we are destroying our lives. I mean, that pretty much sums it up right there. But I got one more for you from the Freedom Outpost. This one says that 71 U.S. sailors assisted with the initial Fukushima relief efforts have developed serious diseases such as testicular cancer, thyroid cancer, leukemia, unremitting genealogical bleeding, and brain tumors since the time of which resulted in exposure to the radiation. So we're going to take a time to talk about clean energy now. Hopefully clean energy has a better solution for us and less harmful effects in using it. I'm going to start by talking about wind power. This is the first known use of clean power, and it dates back to 500 BC. Wind power was used to sail our boats in the ocean, grind grain in the mills, even pump water to fields, and it also provided us with drinking water. It wasn't until 1930 that we started using these wind turbines to produce any kind of electrical power. In 1960, a professor named Ulrich Hutter designed a better producing windmills with more modern materials such as plastic and fiberglass, which this allows the windmill to produce electricity even at low wind speeds. Now, the only harmful effect that has been noted so far, besides it being an eyesore to your landscape, it might give you a headache from the noise. So I guess it's really not that bad if you look at it that way. I'm going to talk a little bit about hydropower. This has also been with us for a very long time. This dates back to 100 BC by the Greeks and Romans. They placed these near riverbeds and streams to turn a wheel, which in turn grinded corn at a mill. The first hydropower station was in Niagara Falls in 1879, which this followed Wisconsin making one which produced 12.5 kilowatts of power in 1882. After dramatic development, one was established at Colorado River at the Hoover Dam in 1936. This one produced 130,000 kilowatts of power. This type of power consists of 15% of our world's electric grid. At this time, there's little facts about what it can cause for harmful effects for our environment. but they do suggest that it migrates fish. Well, of course it's going to migrate fish. You just constricted the flow of water by placing a dam. Now, the other effect this will cause by restricting water flow, other places that naturally would get water are essentially will be cut off or limited to how much water they get. It's not rocket science. So a better way to set this system up would be something that works more well with nature. But that's the only effects that I could see of for hydropower. Now, solar power is also another alternative we have. This dates back to 1876, when a man found it by William Grylis Adams, along with a student of his, Richard Day. Now, in 1953, Calvin Fuller, Gerald Pearson, and Darrell Chapin discovered the silicone solar cell. This was later released commercially in 1956, and not until the late 1960s it was adapted into the space programs. It later caught on to more everyday people and businesses between the 70s and the 90s. So it's came a long way in its use. Driving down the highway, you probably have seen some of these, which is solar panels connected to streetlights. The only risk that I found that can be caused from solar panels is in the construction, since their genetic makeup is silicon, cadmium, and gallium arsenide. So, like I said, the only people that would have any contact with these people are making them and installing them. So they're probably the only people at risk on that. Now, there's also green technology we don't use. So we're going to take a brief look at that as well. Now, everyone's heard about Nikola Tesla and his Tesla coil, but they don't actually know what it was for. So basically, his concept was wireless technology, which he proved at a state fair, which really no one talks about. As you can see in this picture, he's illuminating light bulbs, and his hand's not connected to anything. And obviously, this has got this little lightning thing going on, right? Now, let's see what we use it for. Well, we use it for lighting shows, which you guys pay for. You get to go look at some guy standing there and not get electrocuted. And yeah, it's a total waste of energy, by the way. Okay, so now this is what he really intended for its use. He was going to give us to this for free, by the way, in 1902 or something. But anyways, these two coils, and as you can see, they're connecting. That's because the electric current will have like a frequency. So the house here, if it had an antenna and it was adjusted to the same frequency, it would be able to harness its power and use whatever power it needs, and it would alleviate power lines. Now, if you don't know, power lines have high current running through them, which have a magnetic field per each line. They have also made these devices which they can harness and use wireless technology already, just in case you're not aware of this. Now, a little comparison for anyone that follows history. Here's what the Tesla system would look like if it was established. It's built on an aquifer. It's got two shafts, and this would be a ground. So think of it like a three-prong outlet, right? Same concept, I would imagine. And if you look at the pyramids, they also have an intricate shaft system. I imagine that these two are somewhat related. And the only reason I say this is because you have the Bermuda Triangle. Okay? So, with the Bermuda Triangle, everyone says it has a magnetic force and they can't really explain it. Well, would this make sense if there's a crystal pyramid on the ocean floor that was part of a unique electrical grid that was there established who knows when? Just saying. But I'll let you decide for yourself. Okay, then we have Coral Castle, which was developed and made by Leedskalin. Also developed a couple generators himself. He submitted a patent to the U.S. government, which they probably just ripped up or shredded, or it's filed somewhere not used, or they're using it for their own means, but whatever. So he made this by himself. It's in Florida. He got coil blocks that weighed probably tons. He moved them by himself. I believe it was the use of magnetic force and sound waves, but you know, I'm not a scientist, so I wouldn't know. If you want to really look into some of that type of stuff, here's two sites. They're very long, 6.5 hours. Definitely good information if you want to watch them. I'm not going to say you have to, but it's definitely good information to watch. So in conclusion, it comes down to this, really. Do we continue to pay financially, resource-wise, health-wise for dirty energy that's eventually just going to kill us and our planet? Or do we start looking at more natural, environmentally safe, healthier ways to create electricity that's good for us and our planet? So I hope I opened you up to uh, you know, ways of looking at dirty energy and clean energy and ways that we can use them to benefit everybody. Thank you for taking the time to watch this.